Released on the 5th of July 1970, And Sooner Darkness is a 1970 British thriller film directed by Robert Faust and starring Pamela Franklin, Michelle Dotis and Sandor Els. Jane and Cathy are two young nurses from Nottingham who are taking a cycling holiday through rural France. While having lunch at a busy restaurant, Cathy notices a handsome man drinking alone at an adjacent table. Shortly after the women depart, the man also leaves the cafe on a Lambretta scooter on a country road surrounded by farmland. The women are passed by the man on his scooter. Several minutes later, the women pass him as he rests by a cemetery wall. As women pass through a small village, they encounter the man again. Cathy, who has grown tired of cycling, decides she wants to sunbathe and stops at a wooded area along the road. Jane agrees to rest momentarily, but the two women get into an argument over the trip's itinerary, and Jane decides to continue on alone. Jane soon arrives at a rural roadside cafe, where the proprietor, Madame Lascelles, warns her that the area is dangerous and that she should not be travelling alone. Meanwhile, Cathy, still sunbathing, becomes unnerved and senses she is being watched. Upon trying to leave, she finds that someone has destroyed the wheel of her bicycle. Moments later, she is confronted by an unseen assailant. Feeling guilty over leaving Cathy behind, Jane returns to the spot where she was sunbathing. She finds no sign of Cathy apart from her camera lying in the grass. Moments later, the man the women saw earlier at the restaurant stops along the road on his scooter. He introduces himself as Paul, and Jane explains to him that she is looking for Cathy. Paul offers Jane a ride back to the village where she believes Cathy may have gone. While questioning locals in town, Jane learns of an unsolved rape and murder of a young woman that occurred in the town 3 years before, described to her by an English schoolmistress as quite a scandal. Meanwhile, Paul rides into the woods on his scooter to search for Cathy. As the schoolmistress is about to drive off, Jane persuades her to drive her part way to meet the gendarme and report Cathy's disappearance. En route, the schoolmistress tells Jane the unsolved murder occurred in the same wood area from where Cathy vanished. Unable to locate the gendarme, Jane returns to the roadside cafe and asks Madame Lascelles for help, but she again urges Jane to leave the area. Jane again encounters Paul, who reveals he's working for the Sûreté and privately researched the case of the murdered woman. The two get into an argument when Jane discovers Paul has taken the film from Cathy's camera as evidence. Convinced he has hurt Cathy, Jane parts way with him. Running through the town on foot, Jane finally locates the residence of the gendarme and explains what has occurred. The gendarme goes to investigate the scene, leaving Jane alone at the residence. Paul arrives at the house, but Jane refuses to open the door. When he breaks into the gendarme's home, Jane flees into the woods where she stumbles upon an abandoned trailer park. Whilst hiding in a camper, Jane finds Cathy's corpse. Paul emerges to corner Jane in the woods, but she beats him in the face with a rock. At the edge of the abandoned trailer park, Jane finds the gendarme. Thankful to find the man she thinks will help her, she embraces him. The gendarme begins to fondle her sexually. He then violently assaults her, revealing himself to be the perpetrator. Jane attempts to fend him off and is rescued by an injured Paul, who hits the gendarme with a large branch. The film relies upon Jane's quest unravelling slowly, and for some this can seem to make the film feel slow. Her isolation both through language and geography, and the uncertainty of not knowing what has happened to her friend, with the slow realisation that something terrible may have befallen her, is the glue that holds the suspense together. There are no subtitles, so like her, unless you're fluent in French, we the audience becomes equally as isolated and confused, and the language barrier prevents those trying to warn her from doing so effectively, albeit at that stage Jane can't know for sure if she and Cathy are in danger. So this is shot in colour, on a 1:85 ratio. It has the look and feel of a French art house film. As a suspense thriller, it leans heavy into horror tropes, but being shot in daylight is not as scary or as terrifying as it would be if the whole thing was shot at night, particularly as the rape and murder happens off screen. This whole sole focus is on Jane, as we navigate the whole story through Jane's experience. Also, unlike most horror and art house films at the time, It has a great cast, and you do feel Jane's distress. The distrust she begins to have towards particularly Paul when she suspects he knows more about Kathy than is letting on, which of course he does, but isn't jumping to conclusions until he has the proof along with the cultural barriers, gives her a good reason at that point to distrust him. I think this film is better than its reputation. Like all films at that time released by EMI, they were let down by one inappropriate piece of music on the soundtrack and poor marketing. The opening title music is too jolly. It doesn't suit the narrative. It feels more in common with a cheap and cheesy comedy film of that time, and I think anyone going to the cinema would have expected in the first 10 minutes that the film would turn into a sort of farce, similar to films such as No Sex Please We're British or Carry On Film, not some bewildering isolated terror. Even repeating the happy tune at the end takes you out of the final moment, which has a poignancy about it which, if it had ended with no music, just titles, would have hit long and hard in the mind. But with those gripes aside, is it still worth watching? It's a low-budget thriller, well acted, and at 1 hour and 39 minutes is able to hold a suspense for the full runtime. The setting of the story in daylight, when most other suspense thrillers such as Psycho relied on the dark to bring home the terror, does make this a more interesting study. And if you're in a French-style outhouse type film but don't want to read all the subtitles and don't want to experience all that French angst, then this is an enjoyable movie, worth giving your time to.